Hey, this is Gavin Palmer, and I will start with a disclaimer. I am a sinner. I try to practice acting like a righteous person, and because I am an arrogant sinner, it appears to me that I get better at acting like a righteous person, and so the things I've said in the past, I don't really stand behind them, and because I am a arrogant person, I suspect I will become a more righteous person in the future, so I might not stand behind anything I say here in the future. So I talked to my neighbor yesterday, and I brought the ideas of the Seal of God device and New Jerusalem to the table, but I did not use those words. Those words I think can turn people off, and maybe there's some people it would turn on, but I avoided using those words. And the way I talked about the Seal of God device is that I talked about how China is using, or was using in a video from 3 years ago, these devices that are on students' heads. It goes all the way around their heads, and these students are in the classroom, and the teacher is monitoring the students' attention, their concentration. And parents can monitor their child's attention and concentration while the child is in class. And then I said that technology has gotten better. It will continue to get better. And what if the decision makers who are in government, what if they were wearing these devices so that we knew if they were being motivated by fear or anger or greed? And he thought that was interesting because he was in law enforcement and he had to take a psychological evaluation and do a lie detection test in order to become a law enforcer. And he said it would be, he pointed out that the candidates in government don't have to do that. And I said, well, I think they should. I think they should, not only that, but I think they should be wearing a device that is measuring them in real time using this technology, which will use artificial intelligence. He thought, at the end of our conversation, he said he didn't disagree with anything I said, so that's good, in my opinion. He did give me some pushback here and there, and especially once we got into the topic of New Jerusalem. And I didn't use the phrase New Jerusalem, but I did talk about, I started by saying I didn't have hope in the United States government. So when people talk about politics and elections, we could talk about these two things. We could talk about not having hope in the current system in the United States government, and then point toward New Jerusalem. And we could talk about trustworthiness of people and using technology so that the decision makers are expected to sacrifice their privacy more so than anyone else. So these are the two ideas we can point at when the usual conversations emerge when we are speaking with people in the world, speaking with our neighbors. My neighbor wanted to push back when I said I don't have hope in the United States government. He said he doesn't like politics, and he knows there is corruption. And he knows that things aren't really getting better. And we talked about specifics. It's good to understand how the government works. It's good to understand the power of the purse and the power of the president with executive orders and the trade-offs of doing executive orders and the power of appointing Supreme Court justices. It's good to be aware of these things, but at the core, we have human beings who many were attracted to positions of power because they were already corrupt, and then others who maybe weren't already corrupt get into that position of power and influence, and then are shaped by their environment and become more corrupted. And so that's part of the reason I don't have hope. Now, the path forward I presented was that we need to think about creating a new city. Maybe it's in the United States and maybe it's not. To which my neighbor said, well, they will not like that. The government won't like it. There will be essentially enemies who will resist that idea. And I said, you're right, and that's why we should start on the internet, where we can do political science and we can play. We can have fun while experimenting with new ways of doing things. And so we could look at something like the Constitution of the United States and the Articles, and we can then look at the things like the qualifications to be a decision maker, and we can then play with new qualifications. For example, perhaps, and then you can list out ideas which can be played with and can be experimented with. And I point at the Seal of God device as being like kind of core, because I would like to find some way to make sure that our decision makers are not being possessed by unholy spirits. And I never said anything about unholy spirits or the Holy Spirit or God or the Seal of God device or New Jerusalem when I was speaking to my neighbor. And you can, adapt and change your language depending on the situation. But at the end of the day, I invited my neighbor to be a part of a conspiracy, to create new forms of government, to play games with political science. I made reference to Boys State, where when I was in high school, we pretended like we were the government, and we actually drafted a new constitution for the state of Alabama. And we can do things like that, in which we do political science and have fun and play games and experiment with new ideas, such that we can eventually discover and create new ways of doing things which are better. He did not take me up on that offer, that invitation to conspire together and the creation of a new system which would use the Seal of God device and create New Jerusalem, but I wanted to share how I speak to my neighbor about these ideas in using language that is less provocative. And then there's a question, would I even share this video with my neighbor so that he knows that I'm actually talking about more serious and more interesting topics which I find to be meaningful. And it's truly an invitation to be a part of something very meaningful, to be able to identify righteous people with a Seal of God device and serve me as not being a righteous person. I can serve righteous people and serve a higher power, and through this service we can do the most good in the world. So that's the question in my mind, is will I share this video with my neighbor? I think I hesitate because of all the past things I say. But I've done and said dumb things in the past. There's no getting around that. So let me know what you think. Have a good day.